Good morning, everybody, to the Commission's Executive Committee meeting. We're going to call the meeting to order and get started. Does anybody have any additions to the agenda today? Joe Cimino.
Thanks, Pat. If we could later have a little discussion on staff and board chairs. Just a suggestion on the hand raising function and how it worked yesterday.
Yeah. Or didn't work yesterday in some cases. There was some, yeah, absolutely, Joe. Let's do that. I'll add that under other business before we go into executive session. Anybody else? All right, hearing no other additions, I will consider the agenda approved for this meeting. We also have in your packet the approval of the meeting summary from February 3rd. Are there any comments on the meeting summary? Seeing no hands going up, we will deem the meeting summary approved and accepted. Is there any public comment on items that are not on the agenda? Seeing no hands, we'll move right along. Next item is the report of the Administrative Oversight Committee, and Spud Woodward is the chair. And Spud has a presentation. We'll have we actually have a few items we need to receive or review. Excuse me. One is the 2022 budget, which is an action item, and then the presentation of the investment policy. So, Spud, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. On the afternoon of April 29th, the Administrative Oversight Committee met to deliberate on a couple of items, as we typically do this time of year. We presented a proposed budget for fiscal year 22. You should have received that proposed budget in an email from Laura on Friday. After she reviewed the budget, we had a few questions for clarification and had a general discussion about it. Just a couple of things to point out is overall, the proposed budget for FY22 is a very modest increase over the previous year. Also, it's worth mentioning again that our mortgage is paid off, so that's not a debt we're servicing anymore. And no big surprise, we underspent our budget by a considerable amount of money during the current fiscal year because of our absence of travel. So, are there any questions for Laura on the proposed budget? Let me know if you see any hands, Pat.
Yeah, John Clark has his hand up.
Okay. All right, John.
John, you must be muted. Yeah, you're still muted, John.
There it goes. Sorry, the button wouldn't turn green. Just had a question for Laura about the comment in there that the budget reflects a 5% increase in salaries across the board, but assumes level funding from federal funding sources. And I don't begrudge raises to anybody, but just curious because I know like during ACCSP there was comment about how tight funding had prevented the hiring of an additional staff. So I was just curious, Laura, as to is that 5% across everybody in ASMFC included?
Laura, I think you're muted if you're talking.
Which was about the 5%, and please keep in mind that is a pool, that is not a given, and it is a pool that would cover merit, cost of living, bonus, that kind of thing. So we always put some kind of a pool in there so that we have if we need it, but it is not a guaranteed, it is not a given. Does that answer your question, John?
Oh, yeah, thanks. I mean, it's, like I said, I don't have any problem with it, but being from a very parsimonious state, I would like to get a 5% raise. Thanks.
Thanks, John. No other hands at this time, Spud.
Okay, well, thank you. If there are no further questions, then on behalf of the Administrative Oversight Committee, I recommend the Executive Committee approve the proposed FY22 budget as presented.
It is a committee motion, so it does not need a second. Steve Bowman, did you put your hand up for second or to comment?
No, sir, just to move the motion.
Okay, doesn't need a second in this case. Is there any objection to the motion to approve the FY22 budget? Hearing no objections and seeing no hands, the motion is approved. Well, Spud, you can go right on to the investment policy.
All right, thank you, and thank you, committee, for approving that. Second item we discussed was a statement of investment policy guidelines. Again, in an email on Friday. I won't go into the minute details of it, but basically what it does is it sets up a guideline for how we are to manage our short-term and long-term funds, provides some specificity on disbursement of those funds when needed. Everybody should have had a chance at least to look over it. It's not very long. If you've got questions about it, I will certainly lean on Bob and Laura to address those. So if you do have questions about this policy guidelines, now's a good time to ask.
Roy Miller has his hand up.
Okay, Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Spud. I wanted to pass along a suggestion and comment that was forwarded my way on behalf of the LGAs. Specifically, I received a request that we have a little more transparency with regard to our investment policy, and specifically, it would be nice to know approximate dollar amounts, for instance, in our long-term funds, how much we have in there, what our strategy is for accumulating it. Obviously, being a long-term fund, it's a reflection of market conditions and reinvestment of dividends, so it's expected to grow in a growing economy. But it would be nice to know how much is in there. And in the short-term account, the statement is made that it's the goal is a quarter to a half of the general accounting and administrative fund, which would put it in the neighborhood of, let's say, almost 600,000 to 1.1 million. It would be nice to know approximate dollar amounts in that, and what our policy is for moving funding over to the long-term account. When do we do that? Is there a ceiling that we have? Or is there a minimum amount we want in that long-term account? Just a little more transparency in that regard was the request. And if the person that made that request, who is on this call, if I haven't adequately expressed it for him, I'd invite him to raise his hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Roy. Laura, do you want to comment on that question or any comments?
Unfortunately, I'm having a very difficult time hearing the questions, so I don't know where the audio problem is, but I would ask if Bob heard the question that he respond, because I heard bits and pieces, but not enough to formulate an answer that is, sounds like I know what I'm talking about. Sorry.
That's quite all right. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Roy, we can do a couple things. One is, we can provide a report out. Normally, or we had a conversation at the AOC on when the annual report of the investment policies and the balances and other things should be provided to the AOC and the executive committee as it's spelled out in the document. So we agreed it probably made sense to do that at our spring meeting, which is this one, But we didn't decide that until last week, so we couldn't get the reports together. So I think the plan was to report out to the AOC and the executive committee on the balances of those accounts at our summer meeting. So all that information will be shared at the summer meeting as far as balances and other things. I guess, I take your point that it doesn't have a transparent piece on when we move money from short-term to long-term. And I don't think we've done that for a while. In other words, the short-term accounts is sort of a stable level account that, as you see here, it's invested in CDs and other things, and investing in CDs right now is the same thing as putting it in your mattress. So, we don't expect a whole lot of growth. So any money that's invested in the short and long term have been going to the long-term fund for a while. I think it's important to note that we haven't, since I've been executive director, and Laura may know even before that, we haven't had to tap into these funds for, at least a decade, if not 20 years. So, this is a safety net that we hope we never use. But the notion of how much money do we include in the safety net is a fair question. And I think that, can be a conversation we have once we get the reports on the balances of these at the August meeting.
Thanks, Bob. Richie White, I see your hand is up. Is it pertaining to this issue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was the one that requested Roy bring this up. It's something that I think I've talked before the executive committee in the past about this, and it was something that I'd raised back when I was on the AOC a decade ago. And I don't have an issue with maintaining an adequate reserve, but I think that should be well defined as to what that is, and that has been done with the short-term money. But I think that the long-term should as well. And I think the new piece now that we have is a substantial value in the office that we own. And there certainly could be a line of credit that's not used except in an emergency, and possibly lower our long-term holdings. That could be a possibility. So I think it's important in that it looks like we have a substantial short-term gain from last year that, looks like more than $500,000 if what I saw, if I'm reading that correctly, excuse me. And then the 900,000 in long-term. So, with the things that we need to do, I think it's important that we don't carry money in excess of what we really need for long-term protection. Thinking just Chesapeake Bay, the money that's needed there, and we're having, that's difficult to come up with that. So anyway, that's my thinking, and it has nothing to do with, I've absolutely full confidence in staff and commission leadership, and so it has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with what should our policy be. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Richie. I appreciate that, and I think it's worthy of additional conversation. And I'm glad Bob had reminded me of the conversation at the AOC as far as the issues around transparency that both you and Roy had raised. We will be getting back on to reporting on an annual basis at the spring meeting, as Bob said. But between now and the spring meeting, what I would recommend, if there is no objection, that the AOC talk about how we will report it out. And I would ask that we invite Richie into that meeting to talk maybe a little bit more about that policy and how that would work. Would there be any objection to that approach? Laura, are you objecting? I see your hands up, Laura. Are you objecting, Laura?
No, sir. I'm not objecting. I wanted to make sure you're done. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out a couple of things, Richie. I appreciate what you've said, and I totally understand it. We have not put anything in our long-term fund in several years because one of the reasons that we started this whole the long-term fund back in the days of Jack Dunnigan was with the hope that one day we would purchase an office. So we've done that. We purchased the office. We used, I think, $2 million from our that we had built into the reserve fund to purchase the office. Now the office is paid off. We have no mortgage. We have no rent, which is a great thing. And we have not put anything aside for several years because as our budget has increased, our indirect recovery has decreased because the more money we have, the less indirect we can recover. So I think we're in a place now that COVID didn't help in terms of a real picture of where we are right now, but I think that we are going to be where you were hoping, Richie. And again, that is, we can discuss it further at the summer meeting. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Laura. So if there's no objections to my idea, the AOC will meet prior to the summer meeting, and then we can report back out. We'll invite Richie to that meeting, and we can report back out to the executive committee in August. Any objections to that? Hearing none. Spud, you want to finalize the action item here on the investment policy?
Actually, I have a question now based on the conversation is there seems to be some interest in perhaps making some modification in these guidelines to reflect the comments that have been made. And so my question, I guess, for you, Mr. Chairman, is should we withhold approval of these guidelines until after we've had the meeting you referenced and come back at the summer meeting? Because there may be some minor tweaks to this. And I hate to go ahead and approve it and knowing that we might need to revise it at the summer meeting. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have any objections. I think that a short delay and unless I'm missing something and Bob and Laura have some reason that we would need to put this revised policy in place now, I think that's a really good idea. And I'm not hearing anything. Oh, Laura?
No problem with that at all. I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And that's my recommendation, Mr. Chair, that we'll just table this until the August meeting of the executive committee.
Great. Thank you, Spud. I don't believe we need a motion to table here as long as there is consensus of the executive committee. Is there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objections, we will have the AOC review the policy guidelines with an additional meeting, and then we'll bring it back in this summer. So thank you very much, Spud. That concludes the report of the AOC, and we will move on to the next agenda item, which is an update on activities of the Allocation Subcommittee, and I'll turn that over to Bob Deal.
Thank you, Chairman. This will be pretty quick because, as I mentioned during the Menhaden board yesterday, the allocation work group has been formed. There's 11 members on there now, so it's kind of large, but I think everybody was very interested in this topic for obvious reasons. We have a meeting set up for May 13th at 11 a.m. if anyone wants to attend. I think, what we usually do with all of our work group meetings is put them on the website and announce them. A couple of members of the executive committee that are not on the allocation work group have asked to be notified of these meetings. So I'll probably just notify the entire executive committee when these meetings are occurring in case anyone wants to sit in. But, during this first meeting, it's just going to be figuring out how this group wants to tackle this issue. It's complicated. We've had many different conversations and many different species about it. There's the notion of an external facilitator potentially to help us work through these issues, which is part of this. There's formulaic approaches. There's that BRAC idea where an external group helped with allocation, and that was met with mixed reactions. And so there's a whole lot of different ideas that have come up, but this group will push forward as quick as we can. I envision quite a few meetings of this group just to to get things moving. And if any one of the 11 members wants to chair the group, that would be wonderful. We'd take that. But other than that, there's not much of an update, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to, if there's any suggestions or input from this larger group that they would like me to bring back to the work group, this is a good time to bring them up. If not, we'll just keep moving forward and work through the conversations that have happened at the multiple executive committee conference calls where we've talked through allocation quite a bit.
Thanks. I do see one hand up, Dennis Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the composition of the allocation subcommittee, and don't interpret this as me trying to be on it, but did any LGA, I didn't see any LGAs on it, and did any LGAs express an interest in serving on this committee?
I am not aware of anybody that from the LGAs that did express interest. Bob, are you aware?
No, I just dug out my list and no LGAs did express interest. Everybody who asked to be on it was put on it. There weren't, cuts that weren't made or anything like that. So, if an LGA wanted to be on there, I think we can add them right along.
I'm fine with that, Bob. I just wanted to ensure that we would have been considered.
Dennis, if you don't put your hand down pretty quick, we might consider you. Well,
that's why I was reluctant to make a comment in the first.
Thank you, Dennis, for that comment, though. I think we've given everybody an opportunity, but I would say that if you do hear of any LGA members of the LGA that are interested, please let Bob or I know. Are there any other comments around the allocation subcommittee? Is there any direction that you think we could give them to further focus their conversations? If there are, please feel free to jump in. Joe Cimino.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No, I don't have too much guidance. I hope this takes a very broad scope. I am on the group and I appreciate the opportunity to be. I just wanted to clarify some comments from yesterday. I didn't think that this would, a product from this group would catch up to or be ahead of the possible amendment for Menhaden. But I did think as they move forward together, I would hope that if this group has suggestions that the board also agrees with, that Menhaden wouldn't do anything incongruous, even though it might be finalized before a product is finalized here.
Yeah, Joe, I think that's a really good comment and an important one. My feeling is that as the allocation subcommittee is meeting, my guess is we'll continue to have interim executive committee meetings prior to the summer meeting. And if there's anything to be reported out, maybe that information could at the very least be reported out to the executive committee just for updates. And then if we determine that there is something that should be shared with the Menhaden Working Group between now and, I'm sure there'll be some overlap there anyway, but between now and the summer meeting, we should make sure that that is shared and the intents are made clear. Any other thoughts around allocation subcommittee? Seeing none, let's move right along to the next agenda item, which is to discuss the second round of CARES Act assistance. So I'm going to turn it right back over to Bob Beal.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my part on this conversation is going to be pretty quick this morning. The good news is Karen Abrams and Dane Neymar are on the line with us this morning from NOAA Fisheries, and they know they can answer a lot of your questions. I've let them know that there are going to be, a number of questions have come up at previous executive committee meetings about the timeline, the September 30th, I call it a deadline that's included in the law, and sort of this notion of what flexibility do we have to extend projects and distributions beyond that deadline is an issue that obviously this group's talked about a lot. And I guess the question really is what what meets the guidance of Congress for achieving that September 30th deadline? Is it, fully spending the money, checks in hand for individuals and any non-direct payment projects fully completed, or is it obligating the money through a spend plan? Is it just moving the money to ASMSC? What counts as meeting that deadline? And then the other issue that's obviously come up a lot is what other projects are kind of quote unquote inbounds for that are non-direct payments. So infrastructure, training, marketing, those kind of things that the states have talked about wanting to work on in this second round. What's available for the states and what flexibility the states have when they're making those plans. And those are questions that I've primed the pump with Karen and Dan on. The one question that has been asked and answered since our last conversation was Dan McKiernan brought up the notion of the tariff money or tariff assistance that was provided to a number of harvesters up and down the coast toward the end of last year was, how does that calculate, or can that be used to calculate the 5-year average? Because the money that was distributed in 2020 relative to the tariffs is really for changes in fisheries that occurred in 2019. So could that tariff refund money, if you want to call it that, be included in the calculation of the 2015 to 2019 5-year average? And the answer to that question was no. That tariff money is not part of the calculations for that 5-year average. So that one's been asked and answered. And then I think that's all I have, Pat. And it's probably best to direct specific questions to Karen and Dan since they have the answers.
I see Dan McKernan's hands up. Let's go to Dan before we, and I've got Jason after that. So Dan, go ahead.
Thank you, Pat. Good morning. Another request that we've had from our industry, because we set up 4 working groups for our 4 sectors that will be receiving CARES relief. In our discussion about what federal programs must be included in the calculation for revenues in 2020 to be made more than whole, there was some, I'll use the word skepticism or kind of a show me attitude. So we've had some industry representatives asking, can we get kind of an official document or correspondence that says when you're adding up all of your revenues in 2020, you must include and things like the federal unemployment, the PPP grants versus loans. If that could be just stated clearly, I think all states would benefit, and we wouldn't be caught off guard in case our spend plan when we submit it is missing any of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to invite Karen and Dan in to maybe make comments as these come up. So Karen or Dan, do you have any comment on Dan McKernan's question?
This is Dan Namer, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And Dan, thanks for the question. So we certainly can provide a list of examples, but understanding that that list would be examples, not completely inclusive. We certainly would not want to imply that we know all of the other programs that are out there. That's just not something that we really have complete access to. So I wouldn't want to be in a position where we have a list that we call all inclusive, but we certainly can provide a list of examples of those that we are aware of and that are the most common. But that does not mean that if there are other sources of revenue coming in from other programs, that those wouldn't count towards the 35% / more than whole calculation. Because they most certainly would. So I know that's probably not the answer you want, Dan, but that's probably the best that we can do for you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Jason McNamee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start by saying that I support what Dan just offered, and so that all sounds good, and that's sort of gets to my bigger question, and that is, are we waiting for, there's been talk of additional guidance coming out on a number of occasions, and so I'm just confused as to whether we are awaiting something that NOAA is working on right now? You know, we've begun our process in Rhode Island, and I'm just wondering, we don't want to get too far out over our skis if there's going to be, you know, additional guidance that comes out that we need to look at. So that's my question. Is there additional guidance coming out?
I can take this one, Dan Namer. This is Karen Abrams. We are not planning to provide any kind of additional global guidance beyond what's already available on our website and what was contained in the RFA letter. But we are, you know, continuing to respond to individual questions that we're getting from particular states. So I wouldn't wait because we're not planning to put out any more global guidance.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I don't see any other hands. Anything else from the executive committee for questions? I'm just curious. I sent Karen and Dan, I sent a list of questions through Kelly. Just wondering if you guys have had a chance to get to those yet.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. We did receive those and we are working on a response as fast as we can. We actually just discussed them yesterday, so I expect you'll get an answer from Kelly very soon.
Great, I appreciate that. And I'll make sure I share that information with the executive committee. Any other questions? You can tell we're really excited about digging into the CARES Act again, round 2.0. Bob Beal, I see your hand back up.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Maybe, you know, the two issues that I brought up, I don't know if Dan and Karen have any general comments, but the one is on, you know, the deadline. What flexibility do we have there? And the notion of what other projects are inbounds is what I call them, infrastructure, training, marketing, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Bob. This is Dan Namer again. Karen, why don't I go ahead and address that first question, and then maybe we can tag team the second one. The question of the deadline is a good one, Bob, and certainly one that we've gotten quite a few times. Both the CARES Act Section 12005 as well as the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 identify September of 2021 as the deadline as stipulated in the law. But that is explicitly for the obligation of the funds out of the federal government. So that means that by law, what our requirement is to get the funds from the federal government off of our books and completely obligated, which will happen when the funds are granted to the commission. That said, Congress has made it very clear that their intention is that the funds will be dispersed, meaning getting in the hands of the actual fisheries participants by that same date. That is not explicitly written in law, but it is the intent of Congress, and therefore that is the goal of the agency and, of course, of the commission to move those funds as quickly as possible. That means that any chance that we can, especially for direct payments, we would expect that those funds would be dispersed by the commission by that date. When it comes to projects, and we're going to address that in just a second, what's kind of inbounds, if you will. When it comes to projects, again, the intention is to get as much of that money out as possible, but the answer is no, those funds will not be lost or recalled if they are not dispersed prior to the September 30th of 2021 deadline. Certainly the agency will work with both the commission and any individual state to address any reasons why it's not going to be dispersed by that. But there may be a logical reason that it extends, and we would approve those on a case-by-case basis. So I'll kind of pause there, see if there are any follow-ups from that one, and then maybe we'll try to address the projects a little bit as well. And of course, invite Karen to add on to anything that I just said.
No, nothing to add from me.
Yeah, I can't speak for every state here, but I think there's going to be, if direct payments, the way you described it, need to be dispersed by September 30th, I think a lot of states on this call may have some issues.
Okay, and certainly as you guys, and I say you guys, the states are working on spend plans and working in conjunction with the commission, certainly reach out to us early and often with that so that we can certainly be aware. One, we might be able to help mitigate, and two, if not, then we can certainly help set the expectation for OMB and Congress to make sure that everybody's aware of what the realities are.
And I think that's really key, Dan, is just for your all's awareness on the executive committee, we're getting pinged regularly about how quickly funds are getting dispersed. So we need to be mindful of what we understand to be congressional intent, but understanding what those constraints are that you're under and just communicating about those will be really helpful to us, as well as Dan said, setting expectations for the folks who are pinging us regularly on the flow of funds.
Thanks, Guy. Jason McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry to jump back in, and it's a silly question potentially, but we keep calling it CARES Act Round 2, but it's really not, right? Is NOAA calling it something different? Just curious if anybody's using a different name for it.
Yeah, so Jason, this is Dan. You're absolutely right. So it's because CARES Act 2 rolls off the tongue a lot quicker than the Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2021, Section M. But that is formally what it is called. That act, which is the Appropriation Act for 2021, had a section in there about the relief for COVID. Directly relates back to Section 12005 of the original CARES Act, which is why very often you're hearing people say CARES Act 1 and CARES Act 2. When you see the actual official RFA letter, we will write out Consolidated Appropriations Act and then put in parentheses from here on out referred to as the Act. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Jason, but yes, when we're using official language, we will refer to it as the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. But for most everyday communications for simplicity, we're using CARES 1.0 and CARES 2.0 just because it's shorthand.
Great, thank you. And actually the act in capitals, that'd be even easier, so thanks.
Yes, yeah, that's you know, when we're writing, that's typically what we end up doing because it passes legal muster. But when we're talking, if we say the act, then people start asking which one are we talking about. So,
thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? Bob Beal.
Yeah, just real quickly on this timeline issue, Dan, are you hearing from the other two coasts, you know, the Gulf and Pacific, about the timeline issue, or is that a uniquely Atlantic problem?
No, good morning, Bob. And that is not uniquely Atlantic. That is a concern across the whole of the country, from the Western Pacific all the way to you guys.
That's nice to know we're in good company then.
Exactly.
Could you guys describe a little bit about the tribal allocations? Have they been made yet? In particular, I know it would be helpful for me to understand in Maine what's going on there, because I have a feeling we're going to have some tribal members that may try to cross back and forth between those pots of money. Is there any update there?
Yeah, good morning. And Karen, I'll lean on you a little bit here, but we are still in the process of working out the final allocations there, and we will be having some guidance about what is allowable under both the state and you know, the Marine states and territories allocation, the $255 million, as well as the Great Lakes states, which is $15 million. The $30 million for the tribal, federally recognized tribes, we're still working on that. And then we are working in conjunction with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we're hoping to have the funds dispersed through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not directly from the Department of Commerce, because they have the relationships and the legal mechanisms and authorities to move those funds directly to the tribes in a way that we do not, in an expedited manner. So to meet the intent and the timelines that we just talked about, we feel that that is the best way forward. So Karen, if you have any other updates, I'll lean on you. But as of right now, we're in a little bit of a we're still working on its state.
Yeah, that's correct. And like Dan said, we're exploring some alternative options, potentially partnering with Bureau of Indian Affairs, but that is still under review in the administration. But I know we're keen to move out on those allocations very soon. I think we're shooting for mid-May, which would be very soon.
Thanks. I appreciate that update. And I'm assuming they'll have to follow the same rules that that we're all following, including the made more than whole.
That is correct. Yes, the rules and stipulations of the law and the intent of the law carry forward no matter who distributes the funds.
Yeah. Okay, great.
The one, Mr. Chair, the one nuance to that with respect to the tribes is that there's two components to eligibility. There's meeting the 35% loss threshold that the more than whole condition applies to. But there's also the subsistence cultural ceremonial eligibility option. And so the more than whole doesn't work with that because you can't quantify, for example, ceremonial and cultural values the way you can or you do under the commercial trigger.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. Any other questions about or comments around the act for Karen or Dan? Seeing no other hands, Karen and Dan, thank you for joining us this morning. I appreciate the input on those questions. And thank you for letting me know where you guys stand on the main questions. And as I said, I'll make sure that those answers are sent out to the executive committee as an FYI in case they're beneficial for the other states.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as a follow-up, I want to make sure that we're not avoiding a question that came from Bob Beal with regards to projects that are, in bounds, if you will. Probably for simplicity, Bob and Mr. Chair, we do have a not a complete list, but a list of examples. Maybe we can share that with the committee to identify some of the areas that people are looking at for projects. Again, it would not be an all-inclusive list, but it will give people some ideas of projects that we've identified as allowable.
I think that would be incredibly helpful. And, anything, project related beyond direct payments, that's certainly where our focus is in Maine. So I think I'm sure that would benefit a lot of the states on the call today.
Yeah, not a problem. We've answered that in the past, so we can certainly make that a more universal answer so that everybody has access to that.
Great, thank you. If there's no other hands, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. Okay, thank you, Karen and Dan, again for your input and for jumping on the call today. Moving on to the next agenda item, it is future annual meeting updates, and that's Laura Leach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm hopeful that we're going to see each other October 18th through 21st, 2021 in Long Branch, New Jersey. I've reached out to the hotel. They feel like they're going to be fully open, and Joe and I have talked, and without trying to put words in his mouth, I'm going to ask Joe to address this directly, please.
Thanks, Laura. I think it makes a lot of sense to proceed. We're starting to see from New York and New Jersey governors, although New Jersey hasn't set a date to be fully open yet. I think there's certainly signals that that's something that'll come in the next few months, next couple of months. So that's an exciting start and a return to normalcy. We are working. I think we've got our stuff down for the finalization of our ethics office, which is really our last stage of DEP and what we need to be host. Other than that, we had some great ideas for tournaments and places for those spouses to visit. So I think we'll bring all those back up from last year and hope we can do it this time.
Great, thanks, Joe. So no best guess then on timing of changes that you've heard from your governor's office?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, thank you. Any questions around? I want to have when we finish this update, I just want to have a very quick conversation and around future meetings, just to give a quick update. But any questions for Joe? Tom Fody?
It's not a question for Joe, but some sideline conversation we had yesterday in between meetings. We talked about the fact that, I would like to survey the commissioners, all the commissioners and staff.
Tom, let me jump in, Tom. We've discussed that on the executive committee, and that's going to be part of my update. So any from the executive committee, any members of the executive committee have any specific questions for Joe or Laura on this year's annual meeting? If not, I see no hands. Laura, do you want to finish out your update?
Sure, thank you, Pat. The rest of it in 2022, we're going to be in North Carolina, 2023 Maryland, and 2024 Delaware, and none of those meetings we haven't had any discussions yet on those meetings because we've been in a holding pattern. So that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Great. Any questions on those other ones from the executive committee? Hearing none. Just a quick update here. The executive committee has had a few conversations about where we go from here regarding face-to-face meetings. The idea of a survey has already been discussed. Bob is working on that survey now with staff. We should have a draft of that soon, probably if the executive committee meets out, in a couple weeks out, we should have that maybe before. And I think that'll be key for helping us make a determination of how we're going to start scheduling some face-to-face meetings in the future. There's been several ideas that have been floated. One is alternating meeting weeks, having some meeting weeks in person, some meeting weeks both over webinar. Thinking back to the last meeting week and then to this meeting week in particular with lobsters and yesterday with Menhaden, it is clear that while we got done the business we needed to get done over webinars over the last year, it's clear the benefit of face-to-face meetings. And one of the things I want to have some further discussion on is maybe some sort of a hybrid approach to help limit exposure from a pandemic standpoint. But then, so the concept would be maybe an abbreviated meeting week in the future where we would have webinars on with some species that are more update driven or more simple approaches to decision making, and those that are going to be more complicated with a level of disagreement within that is clearly going to be seen within an agenda as we develop the agendas, that we would have those, start to formalize those and create some face-to-face approaches to those meetings. But I think the survey is going to be key to that. I don't think we need to go into detail on that now, but I think the survey will start to address some of the abilities for us to come together face-to-face. And certainly we're going to need to know what the state-by-state directives are as far as traveling out of state as well. So there's going to be a lot more to come on that. But before I move on to other business, is there any comments from the executive committee around meetings and meeting dates coming into the future? Chris Bat-Savage.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. No questions about that strategy, but just, I guess, a question that I've received from several members of the public regarding, going from webinar to in-person meetings. Is leadership thinking about I guess, having the opportunity for members of the public listening remotely to provide public comment. I mean, anyone can listen in when we're meeting in person, but I think in the past, I haven't had that opportunity to actually provide public comment if they're not in the meeting. I was just wondering if that's been something that's been discussed. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Spud, Bob, and I have discussed that a little bit about how we're going to approach the public side of this. Obviously, we need to ensure transparency in the meetings, and we need to ensure that we're allowing even the most simplest board meeting to have an opportunity for the public to participate if we can't have public in the room during the actual meeting. So we're going to continue to discuss those. The idea of having kind of a live feed webinar going at the same time that we would be holding face-to-face meetings is an idea, one that we need to work out from a technical standpoint, but I think one that would allow us to start transitioning, right? I mean, no matter what we do, we're going to be transitioning back to normal. So I think those type of approaches are going to need a lot more thought. And if people do have on the executive committee have thoughts or anybody within the commission have thoughts around that, I would ask them to please forward them along. Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to quickly bring up a topic that Tom Foti and I have raised before, and that's the subject of joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council. I think while we're considering alternating between in-person and webinar type meetings for certain species, I think we can make use of our experiences with webinar to lessen the travel costs and travel obligations for attending these Mid-Atlantic Council meetings, particularly for, say, summer flounder, scup, sea bass, bluefish. It may be that commissioners would not need to attend those particular Mid-Atlantic Council meetings in person if it could be a combination meeting of webinar and in person. That would be a savings for both the commission and in terms of time and obligation on the part of the commissioners that would otherwise have to attend these joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council. Thanks. I thought I would raise that and throw it into the mix.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Certainly that adds a level of complexity to the conversation, but one I think we're going to need to just tackle head on. And I would anticipate that commission leadership and mid leadership are going to have to come together and kind of see if our thoughts and ideas match to see if we can find a hybrid there. So I agree, it's one we can't ignore for certain. Any other questions around meetings? We're going to be talking about this a lot on some of the executive committee meetings that we'll hold in between the next round here. Tom, do you have another question or comment on that?
Yeah, I've been looking at airline tickets, and boy, I'm in sticker shock. Almost all tickets have gone up by a third. So when we do travel expenses for next year, we have to realize that airline tickets have gone up dramatically.
I'm going to take the Bill Adler approach and start taking the train. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to highlight, Tom. Thanks for that. All right, if there's no other questions, I'm going to move on to other business. But before I do, we do have a closed session for the executive director's performance review. That closed session is with the executive committee. However, are there any other members of the commission that would like to participate in that closed session? If there is, could you raise your hand and we will send you the link so you can join. I've got Doug Haymans. Anybody else? Seeing no other hands, Doug, we'll have staff will send you the link. And what we're going to do after other business, we will adjourn the executive committee meeting, this meeting, and then we'll go into the performance review and closed session. So with that, I am going to move into other business, and I'm going to call on Joe Semino for the issue that he raised earlier.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I can be brief. I noticed yesterday Tony was asking each chair if they would prefer to call names themselves or have staff assist with that. And I think when things are slow, it's easy enough to be at the chair's discretion. But as more and more hands start to come up and the order is no longer in the order that they were going up, it becomes kind of an issue with certain items and the timing of who actually put their hand up when. My suggestion would be that at that point in time, if staff could be dedicated to trying to get the order right and calling out those names to the chair, I think that could be important.
Yeah, I know for like, I like to be able to handle that myself. I think it may be a chair by chair preference. I know probably I wouldn't mind hearing from Spud and Dan, because they're the two species chairs that were dealing with a lot of questions and comments coming in during the last meeting. Spud or Dan, do you have any thoughts around that on whether staff should jump in and do this, or would that be a benefit to you guys?
Yeah, Pat, this is Dan. Automatically, I opted for the staff to assist me on that. I mean, these remote meetings, I feel isolated, and I do worry about someone whose name gets alphabetized and gets dropped lower in the list that I wouldn't be able to see. So I thought the staff did a great job helping me manage that lobster board meeting. I'd prefer that.
Great. Spud, do you have any thoughts?
Well, yesterday was the first time that I've tried to use that attendee screen, and obviously it didn't work very well. In previous meetings, as everyone can recall, I've usually relied on Tony to sort of manage the comment. And I think when you are going to have a lot of comments, that little screen approach probably didn't work very well. And I apologize for the folks that didn't get to make the comments when they wanted to make them. So I think I'll be going back to the staff management of the raised hands in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan and Spud. Dennis Abbott.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Joe that I think that staff should be doing what needs to be done to ensure that people are called in somewhat the order, and also that people who have not been called yet move ahead of whoever's already spoken. I had frustration, I think it was the winter meeting, where it seemed like my hand was up forever and I never got called. And I spoke with Tony Kearns about it, and she explained the difficulties in doing, keeping things in order, and I appreciate what they do. So it's important that people are recognized in some order, and that can only be helped by staff developing a way to ensure that people are, getting called. And also we usually have a method of calling especially we're in dealing with motions, that we go to the 1 for and the 1 against, and keeping it balanced with people talking, for and against. And I don't see a method with just raising a hand that we can accomplish that virtually.
Thanks, Dennis. Mel Bell.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a council experience perspective of running council meetings and committees, we use the same platform. We have a staffer that basically monitors the hands, and then I'm looking at or the committee chair is looking at a list constructed by the staffer that it is in order, and that works really well. We keep it in order that way, and so I mean, I know that works. So it does require dedication of somebody to monitor the hands and construct the list, but it does work well.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. I think you know, for even like a meeting like this, it's pretty easy when you've got 3 or 4 hands going up and you're the organizer, but certainly when staff is is trying to help with there. I know I don't know if it's the formatting issue, but I know when it's just the small screen at the bottom, at least on my laptop, it's so small I have a hard time seeing it without a magnifying glass. So I think if we I think we're going to have to use our best judgment, let the chairs use their best judgment. But I do like the idea of having staff organized. Certainly, if we were sitting at the table, we're almost keeping a running tally on a piece of paper between the chair and the staff member to keep organized, and that always works well. But to Dennis's point, when there are a lot of hands and you're trying to go back and forth between speaking those for and those against, it becomes a little bit more problematic. And I don't know, and this is a question for Tina or Tony. I know when these things, when you're the organizer and they pop up on the screen, they seem to automatically alphabetize the list. Is there a way for that? Is there a setting so they come in order?
I don't think so, Pat, but I can look into it to see if that could be changed. Yeah, I'm not sure, and I can try to look into some other tools that perhaps we could use. Mel, I'll give you a buzz and sort of figure out logistically what you guys do at the council level to try to make it as smooth of a transition as possible. You know, we tried to put the box in the bottom, you know, in large part for transparency, so folks could see that that their hand was up, right? You know, that's a hurdle right there. Sometimes folks don't know that their hand is up or not. But as we've said, the list moves in order, and I do my best when I'm trying to help a chair with those names to keep those names in order. But even for me, sometimes the list gets really long, and I'm like, oh. And the fact that people don't always remember to take their hand down, and I'm trying to do that as people start to speak as best I can. But also, there's every now and again some room for error in there.
Thanks, Tony. I've got a few other hands that have gone up. I had Bob Beal, Dennis Abbott, and then Mike Luisi. And that's probably not in the right order. So
yeah, I got the alphabet on my side, I guess, Pat. So I end up at the top. I don't know if that's good or bad. No, I was just going to say, you know, for this meeting or the remainder of this meeting, should we keep the little window in the lower right-hand corner, or is that more of a distraction and really isn't serving any function because it's hard to read and it's reordered, and then, you know, maybe creating false expectations? We can, you know, as Tony said, we put it in there for transparency and hopefully as a tool to help, and it's sort of a variation of what some of the councils have done. But you know, and I asked staff to put it in there. But if it's not working, we can pull it out for the remainder of this meeting and try something new next go around if people would prefer.
Great, thanks, Bob. You know, like I said, I can't see it, so if it's not a distraction to me, but it may be to others. Dennis Abbott.
Yes, thank you. And to Bob, alphabetically, you're not ahead of me at any point in time. No one beats ABB. But what I'd like to say is, yesterday was an example of problems with virtual meetings. You know, I'm very much in favor of in-person meetings and probably against doing alternating meeting weeks virtually versus in person. Yesterday, you know, Spud had a difficult time, you know, dealing with people 1,000 miles separated, when if we were sitting next to each other, there would have been people in various corners at various times in a very congenial manner trying to sort through the issues that we did and coming up with perfected motions and the like. So again, I'm just not in favor of, you know, I'd like to get away from virtual meetings completely.
Thanks, Dennis. Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've been listening to the conversation, and I just wanted to offer my perspective, as Spud did, based on the virtual meetings that we've had at the Mid-Atlantic Council. I know that a lot of you participate on those virtual calls as members of the Summer Flounder, Scup, Black Sea Bass, and Bluefish boards that we have joint management with. I think some of it comes down to the platform being used. The one that we use at the council does not. It organizes hands raised in order without any alphabet. It's not alphabetical. And I've found I've been able to, over the last year and a half now, run those meetings, with a lot of confidence that we're getting the people making comments that want to make comments. So, I'm not exactly sure what the platform is, but it's certainly something that I think maybe Tony or Bob or staff can talk with Chris Moore about. And I don't know that the commission wants to change its platform, but we've had success at the council with it, and we're, to Dennis's point, we are moving. We are hoping within the next 6 months to start having many more in-person meetings rather than these virtual meetings. So maybe this doesn't even matter after a while, but I just wanted to offer that thought from the council's perspective. Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I think we certainly have a thought process here that we need to, at the very least, have staff help the chairs organize those hands that are raised and ensure that we stay in order. I think there is some benefit of having some sort of a visual list, but if we can't get there, I think the importance is that we're not missing anybody, to Dennis's point earlier. So why don't we continue to see if we can't work on that between now and the next meeting, and I'm sure we can bring it up at future executive committee meetings as well. Any other topics or any other questions or comments on this topic? Hearing none. So at this point in time, we will be going into closed session for the executive director's performance review. If you recall, you should have received an email from Laura Leach, which included another webinar link. And so what we'll do now is we will end this session on this webinar link and then rejoin under a closed session with the other link. So for those of you that will not be joining us, I appreciate your time here this morning, and we will report all this information out at the policy board tomorrow. So thank you very much, and you guys all have a great day.